Everybody, it's such a pleasure to come to Adelaide for myself after spending a lot of time here in the early days of the Australian Institute of Sport. My name is Scott McGrory, for those of you that don't know me. This is quite a pleasurable experience for me to see what all the sports have been working very hard to do behind the scenes and hoping to roll out and explain to everybody throughout the Cycling Australia, the AusCycling Roadshow over the next couple of weeks. A little bit of background on myself. I'm a former professional athlete myself. I was based here in Adelaide for a number of years at both the Institute of Sport for the AIS and also the South Australian Institute of Sport. And spent another extra couple of years hanging around here because I did like the place before I went back to Queensland to get away from the South Australian winters. I think we can all understand that. But over the last sort of decade or so, I've had the privilege of remaining within my love sport and working in the media and other different aspects of cycling. And over the last couple of Olympic Games, I've had the absolute pleasure to be the commentator for road track, mountain bike and BMX at the last two Olympics, and I will be doing it again in Tokyo next year. So I do have a very keen interest amongst all the disciplines that we are looking to bring together and move forward in strengths. So we have a very esteemed panel from all of the sports that we're talking about and coming together for the AusCycling Roadshow, and we're looking forward to hearing some genuine questions from everybody. We are certainly looking to make this nice and respectful and polite, and please be very polite in terms of the questions that you're asking. If we're doubling up, and online as well, because we are streaming, so people that are sending in messages online, don't worry if you're not being heard, if your message hasn't been addressed. If there's particular messages or questions that are doubling up and tripling up and they're coming through a lot, then we will be adding those to the FAQs on the website. So if there's a pretty common theme that's coming through online, don't be too stressed if we aren't answering them, because we will add that to the FAQs, any of the multiple questions that are coming through. We will be doing our best, of course, to get through as many questions as we can. We will try and take preference to South Australians. If you're online, please put down what state you are in, because we're going around Australia to all the different states, so we really do want to focus on South Australia to start with, and of course the people in the room will take first preference. Online, it'll be those that are based in South Australia that couldn't get here to Adelaide, so please put down what state you're from. Yeah, there is a lot to get through. It is a very exciting time, I think, for all the sports, all the disciplines that we're going to be talking about and trying to looking to bring together to move forward as one very strong and disciplined unit. So certainly looking forward to see how that all unrolls. Now, we do have some very esteemed people, as I mentioned, from BMX. Martin Shaw is the CEO, Stephen Drake from Cycling Australia, and Shane Coppen from mountain bike. There are three on this side, and they're our chair people from the sports, Lee Brentzel from mountain bike, Darren Alomes from BMX, and Duncan Murray from Cycling Australia. And a special congratulations to Lee and also to Shane, because they had a fantastic week at the World Championships, wrapped up on Sunday with several medals. So gold, silver and bronze for the Australian mountain bikers. And a special mention for the bronze medal in the women's cross-country, Olympic cross-country, Beck McConnell, after a couple of very, very difficult years for her. So great to see Beck, real tough nut. She might be short in stature, but she's got a massive heart. And to get onto the podium at the World Championships was an extraordinary performance. So to really kick things off and just explain who they actually are and what we're going to do, a quick introduction from our three chair people, and I'll start with Duncan Murray.
Thanks, Scott. Welcome, everybody. I have been racing and riding bikes for 30 years. Was the inaugural chairman of the Amy Gillett Foundation. I started it with Amy's parents, Mary and Dennis Safe, proud South Australians. And my day job is I run an investment firm called Beeson that invests in the private equity and property sectors. And I've been chair of CA for about 18 months. The concept everyone's going to present to you tonight is not one we've come to lightly. The notion of putting 19 organisations into one is a really grave concept that we've put a huge amount of time and effort and thought into. They're proud organisations with long histories, and we all have a great sense of identity. We're a roadie from Victoria or a BMX rider from Mackay, and we're Queenslanders and South Australians and Victorians. But we're much stronger together. the sport is changing. There's some tectonic shifts. The president of the UCI mentioned to me earlier that there are more people with Zwift racing licences than international licences to race a bike in the real world. There's 35 million Strava members. All the manufacturers will tell you there'll be more people riding electric bikes than real bikes. 80% of bikes sold in 5 to 7 years will be electric bikes, and RACV and NRMA and the other bodies will try and turn them into vehicles. We've got some big tectonic forces coming at us. This sport is built by volunteers and by clubs. They're the building blocks of the sport. We can be supporting them a lot better than we have been historically. We have no policy machine as a national level. We have no infrastructure policy at a national level. We're not talking about the environment. We're not talking about health. Sponsors come to us all the time. Sponsors have approached us and said, how do I sponsor all 5 to 10-year-old kids nationally? You've got to get 19 organisations together to do that. How do I sponsor all women's cycling groups? Now, there are 19 organisations, 19 boards, 19 strategic plans, 138 directors, and we would be much, much better off if we all came together as one high-performance organisation. So we've come to these recommendations after 18 months of pause and moderation and thought and care, and we put a lot of care into it. So thank you for listening to them tonight, and I look forward to the conversation as it rolls out over the next couple of months. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Duncan, and keep the applause coming for the chair of BMX, Darren Alomes.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. What more can I say than that, Duncan? You know, coming to the this thing basically earlier this year when I got as chair of BMX Australia, it was a steep learning curve, and it actually made sense very quickly that we need to all come together. Myself, I've been working essentially 40 years now in IT and infrastructure, from the Department of Defence to now local government. So, you know, I've got a fair experience there in that, so much so one of the women I worked with, she said, you know, why don't you come and fix our website up for us? And that was BMX South Australia, and I sort of went there, and then from BMX South Australia I sort of mentioned that you know, IT and security was sort of what I did, and you know, I got the call up and I went to BMX Australia, where I've been chair for the last 12 months essentially. But yeah, I think what Duncan's brought forward here, I think we all need to sort of listen and get on board, because what we want to do is what you guys all do the best, and then fill up the stuff which you need support in. So yeah, it's a quick start for the evening, and at this point to Lee to come forward.
Thanks, Darren. And I guess the one discipline that's not included in this, because it is quite a small demographic, but I will mention it because of who's in the room here in South Australia, is the Skid Kids Bicycle Speedway. Now, I know one South Australian that went on from Skid Kids to be an Olympic gold medalist. I know him pretty well indeed, Brett Aiken. So yeah, there's so many different disciplines out there as well that are perhaps right on the fringe. But please keep a round of applause for the very successful chair of Mountain Bike, of Mountain Bike Australia, after a successful World Championships weekend, Lee Bretzel.
I'm not sure I can take too much credit for the amazing athletes that have chosen to ride the fat tyres, because they're the best. But it doesn't matter what size of the tyre. You know, we're all here. We're all cyclists. Everyone has a very particular passion. You know, and a number of people will switch between them, and you know, and that's you know, there's been numerous people who've started in, say, BMX, and you know, have then gone into even triathlons, you know, road, track, mountain biking. It doesn't really matter. You know, it's what you care about at the time. So I've been chair of Mountain Bike Australia since November last year, and I was an appointed director for 12 months prior to that. So I love mountain biking. I've also got a road bike. I came from triathlons and prior to that horse riding. But I came to mountain biking Australia because it was a sport that I love to do. I do it with my family. I compete with my husband, and I compete with friends. But then I like riding with my kids as well. So I found it an opportunity to take my professional career, which is in significant change and major projects, mining, oil and gas. I'm an engineer originally. And I was able to translate that into sport. So all of the learnings and the experience, my international travel, I always had a bike. I was able to see the world. I was quite adventurous. There was a lot of challenges as well, but I found, having that grounding of a bike was really great. And I was able to bring that over into sport and, sort of doubted a few times. I was like, oh my God, what do I know about this? But actually, significant change, implementation, risk management, financial management. It doesn't matter what the project is. The goals, we ultimately have to get to the goal. We have to work together. There will be some wins, there'll be some gains. There's also a couple of sacrifices for a few people, but generally we're all in it to do something better for the greater good. We talk about transformational change. It's happening in our industry. It's happening, at home. It's happening in our workplaces as well. So, the digital revolution, globalisation, and also, in our health, and that's really something that Australians are passionate about sport, but we're also seem to be quite, we're losing focus of some of that. So you'll see some material tonight where we talk about the opportunities. So we want to really, set this up for the next sort of 20, 30, 40, 50 years. What is the greater opportunity for Australia while not actually losing sight of our history, the size of the bike, the size of the tyre, where you want to race, or if you just want to participate on the weekend. So we cover a very broad spectrum. I think we've talked about, the age group 4 years of age in BMX up to, we've just had masters something plus. I think they're sort of 65 to 70. And we've got e-bikes as well as, normal bikes. So, we're covering a very large spectrum across all of Australia. So, we've got a presentation, but we've also want to listen. We've got a very long period of time for your questions, your concerns. We want to hear those, and we want to answer those as well. So, it's about coming to you and telling you a little bit of a story, but we want to hear your concerns, questions, and feedback. Okay.
Thanks, Lee. It is time to get into the presentation, and the three CEOs will take their particular points through the presentation itself. And also I'd like to acknowledge Dave Meyer from Sport Australia, and also Cameron French. Some of the questions that may be coming in, Cam might be able to answer those on behalf of Sport Australia as well. But please, round of applause for our the presentation. We'll get underway now, and it's Duncan Murray. It's Shane Coppard from MTBA.
Thank you, Scott. If it's okay with everybody, I'll work from this corner because I still need to reference some of these slides. One of the things, just before we get going, that I really enjoy, I've been with Mountain Bike Australia in my role for a bit over, just coming up to 6 years now. And one of the really exciting things out of this entire project is a night like this, where we actually get to sit in a room with all disciplines and have an opportunity to talk and share and experience all those different things that we all can collectively try and achieving together. And when we consider that we are 19 different organisations today, and that's more than the number of tables in this room right now, ultimately we're all trying to get to the same outcome. More members, more funding, better benefits and outcomes and value back to our members. We're trying to find sponsors. We're trying to be the best organisations we can. And what we're hoping to do through this proposal and this program and this project is find a way that we can actually work together, not against each other in the spaces that we have been. So we'll get started. from the work we've been doing for many months, that video that's been put together and realistically represents what we see the future of cycling can be. And I think I just want to address one of the issues. There's a lot of social commentary around things such as this is mountain bike and BMX coming under CA and a takeover by CA. I can assure you that back in late 2016, Martin and I, with our respective chairs at the time, went to Sport Australia and said it's time that we do something better in cycling. We cannot continue to operate under this fragmented model. We need to do better collectively. From there, we've had a series of discussions that have grown and grown and grown to this point. So it's a coming together of three organisations and their respective state organisations to form one collective opportunity for us all to do better for our members. So, some tangible benefits as we see them through AusCycling. And again, these are lists, and I'm sure as the organisation grows, and I think when you go through the presentation, I ask that you see where you are today and consider the status quo and see what we're trying to develop so that in 5, 10, 15 or 25 years reflect what we might be able to achieve as we work together. We aim to have one race licence. We've listened, we've heard what you said. This is important to many people. More resources directed to clubs, unification to achieve better commercial outcomes, that was addressed a bit earlier, direct investment to secure facilities, places to ride, infrastructure. One voice. Collectively, we're very small organisations. We walk into a room and they say, okay, so I've got a meeting with mountain bike and now I've got a meeting with BMX and I've got a meeting with so-and-so. We walk in together, we're one voice. We'll have much more cut through with many, many organisations. Career paths for staff. Some organisations have staff, some don't. And I can tell you that if I lose a staff member, it puts a huge hole in our organisation. We see opportunities to maximise on the opportunities of our staff across all the disciplines. National Bike Ed program, it's really important. Kids don't ride their bikes as much as they used to. Steve's got a story I'm sure he'll talk about later, but we really do need to encourage more kids to start riding their bike again. A National Volunteers program, these are things we can't do on our own, but we can do collectively, and a greater financial strength to allow more investment in the development of cycling. So, one licence. As I said, we've tried to simplify this as best we can. And one of the challenges was that we had, I don't know how many, was it upwards of 200 or something, different permutations of our licences that existed. Ultimately, we made it really hard. We made it confusing. So we've taken an approach to have a membership fee that allows you to become a rec member or a participation member of the organisation, and then you can choose to add to that a race licence so that you can have a dirt licence or you can have an all-discipline licence that you can race. One of the critical things that we sought to do was make it cost-effective for kids to get involved into the sport. We're conscious of how much people spend to participate in sport generally across all sports. It's a competitive market, so we took the approach to make this as easily and accessible as we can, and we've got some examples. I will say these fees are the fees that used to be your fee to the national body, the fee to the state body, but you would still have a fee on top of this to your club. Under the model, you can join multiple clubs if you wish as well. We'll push through and then we can come back because we've got quite a bit to get through. Okay, so some benefits directly for riders. A clear and consistent pathway. We're trying to make cycling easy, accessible, not confusing as it is today. Greater advocacy for safety and awareness. Improved value to our memberships. It's not just about the price you pay, it's about the value that we return. And collectively we believe we can do that better than we can individually. One licence, cheaper fees across the majority of categories. There will be some winners and there will be some losers, but there has to be a levelling point in any sort of change to get an outcome. A strong and united voice and better infrastructure and facilities. Again, I'm sure you will find others. These are just some of the examples we're using right now. Other benefits for riders and volunteers include better recognition for our volunteers. Our sport is reliant and dependent on them at so many levels throughout the country. And collectively, we need to acknowledge that and do that and recognise them better. Improve systems for club administrators. Opportunities to use technology to make the job of club administrators easier than they are today. A bike ed program to help get more kids riding. Infrastructure and advocacy, assistance to help you with your club ambitions to get improved facilities and infrastructure for places to ride. Greater coaching support to build club capacity, same with commissaires and officials. Dedicated club support and development teams. And one of the key things is this here. This proposal is actually not putting any further demands on your club. The intention is that we provide a better service throughout our network back to your organisations and your clubs. You know, there is no impact other than what you do today. Continue to do it. Our ambition is to provide you better service than we do currently. So some examples around the benefits of, as we see it on the membership pricing. You can get a licence from as cheap as $50 through to $80. We took a typical Queensland family where dad races road and mountain bike masters, mum is a rec rider, little Johnny's under 17, rides road and mountain bike, Susie mountain bike, and little Sammy's on the BMX. So we look at the pricing under today's structure, that's around about $800 cost. Under the proposed model, it's $575, and this is before we apply a family discount. There will be a family discount come across the top of that, so you'll see that figure come down even more. If we look at another example, we take a New South Wales elite rider. The figures we've used are taken from the numbers that we have accessible today. Currently paying $377 to just ride road and mountain bike. To do that, $250. So there is considerable savings to people under this model. Opportunities that we don't have because we are fragmented that may exist. This is the Great British and Team GB sponsorship package with HSBC. This just provides you with an opportunity to understand what is available out there. They came together as one. They were able to market their organisation to sponsors from grassroots right through to their national teams, and that sponsorship package is worth just on £8 million, or the equivalent of 14.5 million Australian dollars per year over multiple years. I'm not saying that's out there today, but we don't have any opportunity to go even close to that until we come together and offer sponsors real value for their investment. In the latest, or the last federal election, the government made a number of commitments to a number of sporting organisations around support to garner votes. If you have a look, swimming, 150 million in community facilities. Netball picked up money for high performance. Cricket campuses, academies, high performance. Professional teams. Professional sport is changing and putting so much pressure on our sports, other sports, Olympic sports, to gain access to support and funding through government and sponsors. Collectively, there was just over $800 million committed to other sports, and under direct federal election grants, there was nothing for cycling. We just do not have the capacity to have the voice in the halls. We just don't have the reach. We don't have that lobbying advocacy power that we really need to try and find a way to gain. I'm sure many of you are aware of this, but this is our current structure. If you have a look, we have 3 NSOs. Underneath the 3 NSOs, we have 2 federated models, so the 8 state and territory organisations for BMX and CA. And then underneath that, collectively we end up with 19 organisations, and underneath that we have clubs and riders. So we have a very complex and challenged system. It's very hard. Imagine a child coming home from school and saying, "Mum, I want to race my bike." She needs to map her way through this, through the club networks and everywhere, to try and find the best place and an access point for her child to start to ride their bike or race their bike. What we're proposing through this model is this model here, where we actually have and there's been concern that we receive state government funding. What will happen to that? Is that now at risk? We are meeting with State and Sport and Rec, and I can tell you from the Mountain Bike Australia perspective, we are a Unitarian structure. We don't have states, we're not federated. We're currently recognised and funded as an SSO equivalent in 4 states currently. So it is possible to achieve that outcome. So we look at this slide. We have funds coming in from membership, from various grant programs at state and national level, sponsors at state and national level, event-related revenues and other revenues. Very similar to, these are the core revenues that we all have today in some shape or form. Come into the AusCycling structure. There's an element of that that is spent on providing the services from a national office, and there is considerable funds invested back out through that channel into the local office in states and territories. You know, grants from state and sponsorship from state directly back into here. State and grant money has to be spent in the state. It cannot get lost in this structure here and absorbed down here. It has to come out. It's acquitted and it's audited. It's the way the system has to work, and we acknowledge that. Then obviously there'll be local office expenditures, local sponsor support comes through the system, and we're basically structuring an operational model designed to support local offices, but allowing those local offices to have the resources and workforce to deliver tangible outcomes on the ground to members. Okay. AusCycle will continue to spend at least the same amount as it is currently on the delivery of events and current activities. We're not doing this to compact or contract or change or diminish what we're doing. We're doing this to create more opportunities, and one way to do that is through consolidation. When you consider consolidation and the benefits of it, there are 3 capital items we're bringing to this. We can consolidate our balance sheet to create a financially secure and organisation that is unencumbered of debt, that has money in the bank and capacity to do things. The next asset we're bringing to the table is a combined membership in excess of 55,000 people, which gives a significant voice in a room, any room. There are not many other sports that have that influence because they don't represent that many collectively. And the last one is that we're bringing in is our workforce. Combined, we're over 80 staff. Newco or AusCycling, we're predicting on early startup that it's going to have in excess of or around 90 staff, all working for the one outcome and for the one organisation to deliver outcomes and focused on benefits back to riders. So we're looking at an improved business model, collective shared knowledge, skills and experience from all 19 entities. This is not just built on the NSOs. It is fundamental and critical that the state and territory organisations be a part of this, because their staff have the knowledge that is so vitally important to deliver the outcomes that are so important to all of you sitting here tonight. That's how we get the strength into our organisation, and that connection must remain within this new organisation. Everyone's working together to benefit members and clubs. There's collective learning. We're doing so many great things across our sport, and now's an opportunity to share that and to do that across all our disciplines. We'll have workforces that we don't have in areas that we don't have today: advocacy, stakeholder relations, infrastructure, integrity, sport integrity, things that we just do not have today. We struggle even to have commercial managers. So it's an opportunity to consolidate and build a stronger base. We want to make AusCycling and cycling an easy sport for all to access. So we're investing more into cycling, and when we consider the coming together, and I consider it from an M2BA viewpoint, we're not handing money over. We're investing into the future of cycling, and we're investing into the future of that collectively with everyone else that we're talking to about this. Sport Australia are also going to invest into this project, and that could see the additional 2.5 million put into this organisation from day one. That capitalises this organisation to in excess of $5 million. We establish a strong and sustainable position, and we're addressing today's challenges and positions us to capture tomorrow's opportunities. Strong and sustainable, positioned for growth, with an opening net asset base in excess of $5 million, unencumbered of debt. We're looking to preserve our strengths and grow as a sport. Some of the things that we'll focus on is a dedicated infrastructure team, unified advocacy. We're not doing this well. We don't have the capacity to do this well. Not one of our organisations has anyone really employed full-time to advocate or seek dedicated infrastructure. Expanded club services, greater opportunities to increase revenues, integrated performance pathways. We have there's a high performance program now. The piece that is really missing in the puzzle, especially from all our sports, is a pathways program that sits parallel that to develop the up and coming riders for the future that can then move into high performance. National volunteers we've covered. We're growing the size of the pie to receive more funding and better services. National scheme for riders around education, one licence, improved funding, and this one is critical. We need to establish a commission to honour the heritage and the history of our sport, and that's across the disciplines, that's across the states, that's just within the whole industry. We have a very proud history in a number of our disciplines that goes back well in excess of 130 years. We need to preserve that. That's really special and something that is paramount as we move forward. And that's my section. So, thank you.
Thanks, Shane. Apparently Shane was out of shot. So I'm Steve Drake. I'm CEO of Cycling Australia. I've been in the role for about a year and a half, and I have been on the board for about a year longer than that. My background is I was a bike rider once. Started as a 7-year-old on a green dragster in about 1976. Graduated eventually to a road bike, and was an okay but not as good a bike rider as Scott, so went off and got a real job and somehow ended up back here.
Steve was national champion, by the way, on the road. He wouldn't say it himself.
So it falls to me to talk a little bit about governance and structure of AusCycling. And again, there's been a lot of talk on social media in particular about this being a CA takeover, and I don't think it could be anything further from that. We think it's really important to be building a new organisation to set the broader sport, or the broader activity actually, of cycling up for the future. And that's why we're very deliberately seeking to pull the old structure apart and build something new. And that starts at the board level. So what we're envisaging is that at the time that we form AusCycling, it will have a new board that'll be comprised of 3 members from each of the disciplines that are coming together, and another 3 members that will be nominated by Sport Australia. And the idea there is to make sure that we have an appropriately balanced skills-based board. That board will comprise the 3 current chairs of the disciplines that you met earlier. I think a key part is that the ownership of AusCycling will be the clubs themselves. So you won't have interposed entities in the middle. Clubs will be in future voting directly for the directors of AusCycling. Again, another important piece we thought is this is going to be a new start, so there will be a new CEO. It won't be me, it won't be Martin, it won't be Shane. We're setting up a new entity. There are some new challenges, and the transition board will appoint a new CEO. And then the board subcommittees, which we'll talk about in a little bit, will have representatives from all of the disciplines as well. So I'm not sure how much more we can say that this is not a CA takeover. This just illustrates, I guess, what I went through before. In terms of pulling that initial board together, there'll be a nominations committee. Sharon comes from BMX, Peter from mountain bike, Linda from from cycling, and then there'll be an independent member as well that are helping to pull that initial board together. And then as members cycle off, no pun intended, the new board members will be elected by the clubs. Also, come back in a minute to this function of a national advisory council. The chair of that will also sit on the CA board, the AusCycling board, and will take one of these spots depending on what discipline they come from initially. This slide is designed to illustrate principally the role of the advisory councils and how those will work at state level. So this is sort of a functional description of what AusCycling will look to provide, but a key part is what's going to happen in the state and territory offices and how do they relate to the existing structures and back up to the board of AusCycling. So what we're envisaging is that there'll be a state and territory advisory council in every state, and we'll go on to the composition of that in a moment. And that will, the chairs of each of those will have will sit on a national advisory council that has a direct line into the board. So again, coming back to this concept of state and territory advisory councils, what we're trying to do is preserve the knowledge and the background from the state organisations, have them represented on the one unified body, so 3 from each of the disciplines, and those will act as sounding boards, if you like, for the state and territory GMs, and assist with a range of matters, including state team selection panels, historical matters, volunteer recognition, a whole bunch of stuff that is important to preserve within the structure of the new entity. This is a really important slide because it kind of describes the way we want AusCycling to operate. A traditional org structure sort of starts with the board and works down, and you might see the state offices and the clubs and the members right at the bottom. We want the members and the clubs to be the focus of our activity, and so they're going to be right at the top. And who interrelates with the members and the clubs the most? It's our state and territory officers. So really, we don't see that as this exercise as trying to create some national, monster that sits over the top. What we're really trying to do is empower our state and territory officers to provide better services to the clubs and the members, because we want stronger clubs and we want more members. We want to engage with people who want to ride a bike much more successfully than we have in the past. Now that involves some direct interaction with members, because there's a bunch of central services that can be provided from a national body. That doesn't mean that they'll all be in one city, far from it. I think one of the potentially huge benefits of this exercise is that somebody who's talented, who at the moment is only working, to do stuff in Tassie, can do something for the whole country. And it also means if you find somebody who's awesome, who wants to work for AusCycling but they want to live in Darwin, fantastic, great, they can serve the whole country. And again, that's a real synergy, and it's one of the things that it's a really big disadvantage of the current model that we have with 19 separate organisations, some of which have staff, some that don't, but there's actually no incentive to cooperate across those 19 entities at the moment, and that impedes the performance of the whole system. This sort of describes the sorts of activities that will happen out of the local offices versus out of a head office. But I think the key thing is that over time, as we get this running, we really see that the workforce in the local offices will grow because, again, where we want to make the biggest improvement is by saving little bits left and right, we can afford to invest more in delivery at the local level. Now, we talked about the ownership of AusCycling being by the clubs, and part of the work that we did was to try to come up with a voting model for how to set something up that's fair, that gives everybody a voice, doesn't disenfranchise small clubs, but doesn't give large clubs massive votes. And so you can sort of start from a world where one club has one vote, or you can go to the other extreme of saying, okay, for every member you get one vote. Now, we don't think that either of those is a particularly attractive model. So what we looked at was trying to set something in between, and we've come up with this voting model, which is one that increases the number of votes that clubs get as they get larger, but at a decreasing rate. So your sort of number of votes start to taper off a little bit. So compared to a model where, say, a club might have a vote for every member, in that circumstance, a club with 10 members has 10 votes, and a club with 800 members has 800 votes, so it's 80 to 1. And we don't think that's very fair for a small club, and small clubs are important. There are some that are in remote areas and they don't have any chance to be bigger, but they still have a need to have a voice. This proposal, we think, sets a fair balance, and it leaves the balance of power in the middle with clubs that are around the 100 to 150 member number. These charts set out what it means in terms of how the vote would pan out across the disciplines and across the states. I think the important thing to note here is votes only happen once a year, and they only really happen for board positions and to approve accounts. The really important thing is the interaction between the staff on the ground and the clubs and the members, and that's what we want to build. We've been asked who votes. Now, there is some information on this on the AusCycling website, and it's complicated because we've got 19 different entities and they all have different rules. So this slide sets it out, but in almost all of the states and territories for CA and BMX, it's the clubs that vote at the moment. The two exceptions are Cycling ACT and BMX Queensland, where Cycling ACT has individual member votes, and that's the same as MTBA, and BMX Queensland has an interposed level with zones. And then at a national level, it's the state and territories that vote, and MTBA individual members who vote. Now, these are the suggested dates for the voting process that we're going to be proposing. None of those are set in stone yet, but our objective is to try to get out and talk to people, understand any particular concerns, but get to a voting outcome by the end of this year. Now Martin gets to talk about implementation.
Thanks, Steve. I'm Martin Shaw from BMX Australia, and great to be in the room with you here tonight to go through all this. Been lots of questions asked around implementation of this process if it gets up, so I'll take you through a few of those areas here tonight. The first question that often comes up is what's the legal process? So Steve's just spoken about the voting. The process is a two-stage process. So there will be votes at a state and territory level, and then there would be votes then taken forward to a national level. So at the state and territory level, which is for cycling and BMX, a number of resolutions would be put forward to the members of the state bodies. So those resolutions would be to approve the AusCycling constitution, so the rules and the structures for the organisation that set it in stone. The second one would be to authorise the transfer of all business and assets from the member state and territory association to AusCycling. Okay, so one of the questions we get asked quite often is, you know, if the assets are going to be transferred over, how will that happen? Well, it will only happen if the members approve it. So there will be a specific resolution put forward that the members would have to approve and be happy with in order for this process to continue. The third resolution would be to approve the voluntary cancellation of the entity following the transfer of business and assets to AusCycling. So those three resolutions are there. We want to be very clear that this is something that is being put to the members. You know, there's been some comments out there about how this is just the NSOs coming in and railroading state associations and clubs and members, that this is going to go through. That's not the case. This is going to happen if the members approve it. If the members see the benefit, see what this organisation can be, understand what it can do for the future of cycling in Australia. This all has to be approved by the members. One thing to note is the resolutions are conditional. Okay, so if at a state level, South Australia decides, yes, we want to be part of AusCycling, we think this is a great thing. They've basically gone through and said, well, yep, we're going to hand over our assets and we're going to vote ourselves out of existence and we're going to come into AusCycling. If the other states decide not to do it, your organisations aren't voted out of existence. Okay, they're conditional upon this becoming effective once the relevant national sporting organisations pass their resolutions at a national level. So there's no problems, there's no fear of supporting this process if you like it, and especially if you're voting early on in the process. If you like it, support it, hopefully it goes ahead. Each of these resolutions are special resolutions, so when they go to your general meeting, they will need to be supported by 75% of the voting members. Okay, so they're special resolutions, they need to have significant support from the membership. The second aspect of that is then to move forward to the national level, and each of the state associations would take their vote from a state level and carry that forward into the national level. So for CA and BMXA, that would require 6 of the 8 member states, or a minimum of 6 of the 8 member states, to support the process in order for this to go ahead. For Mountain Bike Australia, they would need 75% of the members who vote in the election to support it in order for mountain bike to come on board as well. So once that had happened, there'd then be business transfer agreements entered into between all the entities and AusCycling, and those agreements would look at what is being transferred, novating existing contracts, including employment contracts, would look at when the assets would be transferred and look at arrangements between the signing of these agreements and the completion of the process. So business transfer agreements include an obligation by AusCycling to provide services to individual members that were previously provided by the NSOs, so there'll be continuity of service. And pre-existing entities then undertake the voluntary cancellation process. So that's the legal process. we've spent a lot of time talking about the positive things that can come out of this. We've talked about the services that we're not delivering at the moment in terms of infrastructure, in terms of advocacy, commercial outcomes, government influence, all those sorts of areas. So many positives that can come out of it. But we do need to consider what the implications are of a no vote. And the implications are lost opportunity. So some of the things that we've talked about today, you know, a single licence that would allow people to ride all 3 disciplines without going to 3 different organisations, paying 3 different membership fees, would allow a kid that's riding BMX to have a little bit of a dabble in road, would allow a road rider to maybe start looking at trying some mountain bike events. If we don't go ahead with that, that's a lost opportunity. Our licence costs, you know, Shane took you through some of the licence costs. We're trying to make sure that across the board there are far more winners than losers out of our licence costs. The lost efficiencies, if we stay as we are, still remain. We're still 19 different organisations, we're 3 different disciplines, we're investing in 3 different membership systems, we're running 3 different financial systems. You know, we're having 3 different sets of discussions with government. We're trying to talk to commercial sponsors and having the roadblocks that Duncan mentioned, that there is no one body that can represent us. Limited capacity for lobbying for rider safety. At the moment, we are so easy to ignore. We're 19 organisations. Who represents us? No one. We're easy. Government can ignore us. We're 15,000 members. Mountain bike's 17,000 members. CA's 20-odd thousand members. Suddenly, if we go 55,000 members, we're pretty hard to ignore. If we start capitalising on the recreational membership opportunities that can come with this as well, we're 100,000 riders. Suddenly, we're really hard to ignore. If we stay as we are, we're going to stay as easy as we are to ignore. And none of us have the capacity to have somebody walk in the halls of the corridors of Parliament House, meeting with politicians on a regular basis. And the slide that you saw of where the funding went for those professional sports and Netball Australia and cricket, they go there because they've got people whose job it is to walk the corridors of Parliament and speak to MPs and lobby them and do all those sorts of things. And that's one of the roles that will be added in AusCycling. We can start with that and build it. Our capacity to capture materials sponsorships remains very limited. You know, I don't know what the largest cash sponsorship is in cycling. I don't think it would be over $100,000. When you have how many people ride a bike in Australia, you know, it's just not good enough. But we can't do it as 19 different organisations. If we come together, we've got the capacity to go into a Commonwealth Bank, a Woolworths, a Telstra, those sorts of organisations. And I can tell you, from BMX's point of view, we don't have the capacity to go in there. If we get it right with this, we do. Cycling's voice in the community with government remains divided, as I've said. Financial capacity of the cycling system will remain weaker by 2.5 million. And that's before we start looking at growing the pie. Right, just from day one, we'll be weaker by 2.5 million. If we get this right and we grow the pie, that becomes 5 million, becomes 10 million over time. If we maintain our fragmentation and confusion for riders and potential new participants, we continue making it difficult for them to decide or to figure out where they're going to ride. We're all cyclists. We know the system. We understand it. Mum, who's just come home and little Johnny said he wants to start riding his bike for sport, has no idea, doesn't understand it. Doesn't know whether they need to get a mountain bike, doesn't know whether they need to go to BMX, doesn't know whether they need to go to Cycling Australia. If we're AusCycling, they know where they need to go, and we can point them in the right direction. We can give them some guidance. Finally, limited career pathways for staff remain. One of the great things about this is the workforce that we will have working to support all aspects of riding a bike in Australia. Now in BMX, we're 6 people sitting in an office in Sydney. We've probably got 3 people out in state associations. We're working hard, we're doing our best, but that's not 90 people supporting the sport. And if we get it right, we can keep those people. As Shane said, every time we lose a staff member, we're under the pump. With 90 people, we've got career paths for them. We've got coverage if we do lose a staff member. All those sorts of things are there, and they're opportunities for the sport and they're opportunities for cycling to become better. If we say no, we've lost those opportunities. So I think there's some pretty significant opportunities there. Opportunities that we don't want to lose. If we really want to give cycling the best chance to become a really significant and really fundamental part of the Australian sport and recreational landscape. At the moment, we're not there. Bring us together, suddenly we've got a chance to have a pretty big organisation, a pretty powerful organisation, and one that will be working for the members and providing support for the members. In terms of the timetable of where we're going, well, we've had discipline workshops, as you'd be aware, with the state associations. In August, we had a combined discipline workshop which brought together all the state associations from cycling and BMX and brought together a number of mountain bike clubs into the one room. And they've been completed now. We're starting our roadshow. We're starting it here tonight. Fantastic to start it off in Adelaide. And you'll soon get a chance to ask your questions, so I'll be brief. After that, as Steve pointed out, voting in November. Once we know what the votes are, and you know, hopefully it's positive, we can go into a detailed implementation planning stage. So I understand that there's a lot of questions out there about how this is going to work and where's the detailed plans in transition. Steerco's been pretty clear on that in terms of there's so much work to be done in that aspect. It's not a great use of the limited time that we have until we actually know whether this process is going ahead. Then we can get stuck into it. The amount of time we would have to put into that before we know whether the process is going ahead would completely drain, you know, the reserves of my 2 colleagues here. After that, AusCycling would become operational. We're looking at, you know, Q2 2020 as a possibility, and that will be the start. You know, we're not saying at Q2 2020 we're suddenly going to have sponsors walking in the door, you know, governments lining up to meet with us. It's going to be the start of it, and it's going to take some work and effort, and there might be a few hiccups along the way, but we believe that the benefits are worth it. So our proposed transition approach, look, one of the things is day 1 will feel much like day -1, especially at club level. You know, we're not out there to try and bugger up what's going on at club level, right? We want to support it, we want to help it, we want to grow it, we want to make it better. But at day 1, your club operations aren't going to change too much. The racing that you do is going to continue. The events that you hold are going to continue. It will be a very smooth transition in terms of at that state level. We're looking at it, and the quality of the outcome trumps the speed of the implementation. Okay, I know everybody will want this to happen quickly. We want to get it done as quickly as possible, but we've got to make sure that in doing so, we do it in an ordered and structured way, so that there aren't people out there saying, you know, there's too many hiccups, there's not this, there's not that. We want to make sure that we do it and do it properly, and if that means we take a little bit more time to do it, we'll take a little bit more time to do it. There's no problems with that. Big questions is what's going to happen at state and territory level. And I think Steve's made the point, you know, with his inverted model of what the organisation will look like, is that the state offices are an absolutely fundamental part of what we're trying to put together. And so in that transition phase, those state offices are going to have a really important role to play in the co-design of their local transition. Once again, we want to make sure that everything that's happening today happens tomorrow. And our state officers are the people that know that, and they'll lead us in that. So they'll lead us in the design of it, and they'll lead the actual transition. Right? This is not a head office driven transition. This is something that will be led and guided by the local and state officers. One of the things, very important, everyone will be highly respected throughout the change. And that's at all levels. That's the staff, that's the advisory boards, that's the disciplines. You know, one of the things that I hear, I'm in BMX obviously, one of the things I hear is how will the culture of BMX stay? How will we not get trampled? How will we not get ignored? And there's, you know, a few things that are happening in that. In terms of the composition of the board, it's equal composition. There'll be as many BMX members on that transition board as there are cycling and mountain bike. You know, but having said that, there's also, it's really enshrined in terms of what we've been doing, that every discipline has a really important role to play in this process and in this organisation. We're here for all riders. All riders in all states, riding all types of bikes, for whatever reason you want to ride a bike. It's not just about sport. Most of us in the room are probably here because we're sports riders. But it's not just about that. We want to represent recreational riders. We want to represent the person that rides their bike to work, rides the kid that rides their bike to school. So everyone is going to be really important and respected in this process. So if we get this right, if we get this proposal right, and we get the transition right, and everybody gets behind it and supports it, hopefully we've got some great things. We've got one racing licence. We've got more resources directed to club and member services. We've got a process that has facilitated better commercial outcomes that can secure direct investment in facilities and infrastructure, whatever your discipline is. Doesn't matter whether it's a velodrome or a BMX track or a mountain bike trail. AusCycling is there to support it. We've got one voice for cycling. One voice for cycling. It'll be massive if we could get that. Better career pathways for staff, national footprint for all disciplines, a national bike ed program to get more people riding. You know, when I grew up, everybody played on their bikes, rode their bikes. Doesn't happen so much anymore. We need some help to get people on bikes. If we get a bike education program, that gets them in the system to start with. National volunteer recognition program and greater financial strength will allow for more investment into developing cycling. And I think, you know, it's clear as day that that's what we need. And we feel that this structure will help us achieve that.
to Steve. Pretty much straight away, but I just wanted to, I guess, make a note that slide deck and presentation is now online. So go to AusCycling, AusCycling.com.au to get a recap and really go through that. Understanding what the concept really is so important, and that is the first step. I guess the first key step in really going forward and making this happen. Yeah, I think the passion that all three CEOs from the three disciplines showed and indicated then, I think is quite inspiring. The coming together of the three disciplines for the greater good, I think is very, very important, and that's what we've just heard from that presentation. So go to auscycling.com.au and have a look through the presentation at your own speed and get a really good understanding of what the concept is all about. So I guess we can throw it to the board, throw it out to the room now. Questions? Who wants to go first? Who wants to kick us off? Who's out there? There we go, the brave first.
Thank you, James Kelly. I've had a fairly long experience with Cycling South Australia. I've had a limited experience with BMX SA, and I've a lot of friends in the room. In my work life, I've come across these sorts of mergers before. And the critical issue where they look really good on paper is actually with cultural clashes. And my experience with, and looking through the slide deck last night, one of the questions I wrote down was about the cultural learning that can happen. And through my experience with BMX, I saw a lot of things that were fantastic culture to bring across to Cycling Australia or to road and track. And to try and get those things to move across in a positive fashion, I've found relatively difficult to do. But I know that those sort of cultural differences that can occur between organisations can really hinder these sorts of processes. As a group of leaders who are going to be driving it, what sort of approaches are you taking to make sure that we can maximise what we retain out of the cultures of the three different organisations?
James, would you like to steer that to anyone in particular, or is there anyone up here that would like to answer that directly?
I'd be very interested to hear. I mean, we've got 6 people up the front here who are all absolute leaders within their organisations and who drive, who set the tone from the top for what the culture is. So I'd be interested in anybody or everybody's opinion on it.
Okay, I'll have a shot at that one first off. It's a question that we've repeatedly talked about in all of our forums, and it has really become part of a cornerstone that we need to ensure that we provide and protect the cultures. And I think the opportunity that we now are in the size of the 3 respective organisations mean that we all come together relatively with quite a bit of experience, quite a large footprint, quite a bit of history now than we may have before to do this. And what we're trying to do through things such as, even to answer your question directly, I'll go to things like we're trying to maintain identities in colours. We're trying to maintain identities around some of the branding or slogans that the different disciplines have respected. But one of the key things that we've had discussions with in planning and working out how we transform workforces is how to bring all those synergies, all those staff experiences that we have, the collective skills. From a mountain bike perspective, yes, we'll say that we believe we can bring a lot to improve how this organisation can run from our experiences. We're a lifestyle-based, family-friendly organisation. That's where we start. We believe that BMX can bring a lot of that into the organisation. And that road also brings all that. It does become a big challenge for the leaders, but what we want to create within the workforce of the organisation is a culture where people feel respected enough that they can bring through their learnings, their experience, their thoughts, their innovations and all that, and be heard and respected within that organisation, so that it's not driven from the top down, it's actually driven from the bottom up and from those experiences and cultural differences to try and create something that is really unique. Does that... It's a challenge, and everything comes as a challenge, and I think one of the really important key pieces to do this right is that We don't want to sit here and develop this just from a national organisation, as I said earlier. It's very important once we get beyond a voting stage that we can embrace and get people from within the states and all the different cultures to come and ensure that we enshrine into that organisation's operating culture, and we're talking the operating culture as much as anything, those cultural differences and importances that do represent us, but at the same time allow us to draw on all those experiences to create a combined entity as well.
Duncan wanted to have a go at that question as well. Pass it. Yeah, just flick it on.
It was James, wasn't it? It's an issue that's worried me from the get-go, that we'd bring all of these things together and just create one big beige, grey national bureaucracy. So I've been worrying about it for 18 months. And an interesting thing has happened over the last couple of months, that people have come up to me whenever I've raised the topic and said, you're over intellectualising it, don't worry about it that much. I'm a mother in a BMX family from Frankston in Melbourne, and I'm a proud Victorian, and my husband rides a road bike, but I know who I am. I've got my identity. Don't disrespect my identity. You can't take it away. I wish my kids went up the road to the local road and track club and started riding track on a Sunday morning rather than going to play AFL or netball or whatever it is. But don't underestimate what a strong sense of identity we've got as people in a discipline, as people from a state. And it will be very hard to kill that. I think that's right. I think you can then do operationally, and I've done mergers and acquisitions my whole life, you can then operationally do things like having state advisory boards, like having heritage commissions, like having equal representations on boards. There are no policy people across any of these organisations, and there are no human resources or people staff across any of these organisations. So if you have people playing those roles who are very operationally focused on that issue, you can put mechanisms in place to protect it. But my first answer to your question is we're really, really conscious of it, and it's all in the art of the execution. And I think we can execute it well.
I think that answers the question.
I think
Having an understanding of the potential clashes that there can be, and in the first instance, then being aware of finding a way to manage that.
And I think, like all problems, it's about bringing a glass half full approach. I hadn't been to a BMX meet for a long time, and I went to the BMX Nationals in Bunbury 18 months ago, and I remember, like, if Steve wasn't as good a bike rider as Scott, like I was a long way south, but I still remember going to race track at Leongatha in Victoria when I was a kid, and it was a family sport. And there were Hiluxes around the velodrome, and there were families, and all the kids did it. And I went to a BMX meet, and I thought, this is what track used to be like 20 years ago. Like, there's something special here. There's mum and dad, and they've invested a huge amount of money in the kit, and it's a family. It had a family vibe, and track has lost that over the last 4 or 5 years. So I think it's not just the other analysis we need to bring to this is not just how do we not lose what's sacrosanct to our identity, but what can we learn from each other? And I think the glass half full approach is we all do some things really well. And it's an opportunity to sort of, by osmosis, spread that through the organisation. So I think there's a glass half full question as well.
And again, I see the question as two sides.
Yep.
And that's answered the other side of it, which is recognising that the organisation over there at BMX may well be able to teach CA something handy, or let's all try and grab the best things out without having to fight.
We've grappled for 18 months as a board on how to fix track, because track at a grassroots level is in a little bit of trouble. There's some fabulous people trying to keep it going, but it's got its challenges. My view is BMX knows how to fix track.
And I'd just add to that as well is that, we came together. A few of us are at different timings. The CA group have been at it a bit longer, Shane and Martin as well. But certainly when I started in November, we kicked this off in earnest. I did this year. It's always been, we've come together with ideas and we've probably matured them together. So no one's actually had the ultimate answer. We've all listened, collaborated. We've had some constructive conversations. we've had some very robust conversations, but we actually all still talk to one another. And I think we've really matured throughout that process. And I'd hope that continues into the future as well. So no one's actually come in with the right answer. And as you heard, we had some discipline workshops, and we've listened to those and we've made some changes. So I think it's a learning organisation, and we would continue to support that and encourage it. We could put the structure and the governance and the rules and the regulations in place, but it will be ultimately up to leading like that and hoping that the staff follow that. Our role modelling, and they continue to do that. But we're certainly not preventing it, and we're encouraging it. And this is where we've got to so far. So we're living proof of that.
In terms of the different abilities, Duncan, track and road cycling, that's why they have handicaps. So you always get a chance, mate. And the corporations, if they become a little bit grey, it's because I guess the most passionate people in it are either the owner of the business or the person making the most money. We're dealing with everyone that is passionate. So I think the organisation will be shaped by the individual passions that we all collectively have through our disciplines. And I think that will just be too strong to overcome any other force trying to create a personality within the sports. But good start, James. Other questions? Let's keep it going. Let's keep it rolling. Over the back, yep. I'm just going to bring the mic over to you. Apologies to anybody that is listening online. If the mic changes around and comes back and forth, you may not be able to hear the question, but at least you'll get the first question in for sure.
Hi, Stacey Quinn from Port Adelaide Cycling Club. I'm also chair of a sport that's moved into the unified model about 10 years ago, so I've got some great learnings if we ever get to that implementation phase. So I actually see this as a really positive thing, and in a lot of the materials and a lot of what we've talked about tonight, there's obviously a really large emphasis on growing that participation base and that recreational membership. Obviously here in South Australia, a lot of that recreational membership and even a lot of the racing membership lies with veterans, which is split off, Bicycle SA and the Bike Institute. What's the plan for, and I'm sure the other states are in a similar situation, what's the plan in regards to getting at that level?
Thanks, Stacey. It's not an uncommon question about why is there only 19 organisations in the room, and that's really the answer. It was hard enough to get all 19 in the room from the competitive side of the sport, we would see, ultimately our objective is for AusCycling to have the loudest voice and the most concentrated voice that we can have to achieve the best outcomes for the activity of cycling. So I think, I think that the opportunity for organisations like VETS to be fast followers and come along is a terrific one. I mean, the overlap between road and track, or CA and VETS, is probably larger than between our three disciplines at the moment. So the benefit to members of getting rid of that duplication is larger. And then I think for the same kind of applies to the participation bodies, that if we all come together, we'll have a much louder and more effective voice. So I think once we've got our act together, the door will be open to others to come as well. Yeah, and look, we have had some conversations, but they're preliminary, and they're kind of pending on us getting our act together first.
Thanks, Stacey. Next, keep them rolling. We're here for you, so happy to hear from everyone. And you've got some online, have you, Cam?
Yeah, I'll grab an online one quickly.
Yeah,
There's
sure.
quite a few coming through on Facebook. How will the additional money solve the problem of lobbying and advocacy? It needs good leadership and political connections.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. It's a good question. As I mentioned, none of the 19 organisations that we have right now have a person whose role is to go out and advocate and lobby and walk the corridors of Parliament and meet with MPs. and meet with ministers to advocate for cycling. So one of the roles that we have in our staffing structure, or a number of roles, will be based around advocacy. Will be based around going out and advocating for the sport. You know, netball is fantastic. They've been doing it for the last 10 years. They've had people walking the corridors of Parliament, and they're getting the results. Steve talks about Cricket Australia. They have 12 staff across the country whose job is lobbying and advocacy. And they get the results. Every time there's an election, they get money. So we see the ability to fund those sort of positions as a really important and really vital part of it. In order for us to be able to afford to fund those, we need to come together, because we can't do it, and none of the 19 organisations are doing it at the moment.
We could just threaten the politicians to send them down the Supercross ramp. They'll say yes to anything after that. Yes?
Hi, my name's Leanne Fleming, and I run a cycling business in South Australia. I come from the road and track background, really, not really road. I was wondering whether you've had a consideration in all of this to consider the cycling businesses that did come off what was previously known as AusCycle, because we are a small, but we are a valuable resource within the cycling industry, as well as what will the coaching qualifications and recognition be across the country, because it'd be really good to be able to employ that person who's as a BMX coach, but I can't because they're not on the CA model, that sort of thing. So I know it's a very detailed question, but it's about the businesses of site that are involved in cycling, and also the coaching qualifications of the hundreds of coaches we've got across the country.
Okay, thank you, Leanne. Look, maybe if we look at it from a perspective of MTBA, we're currently a unitarian structure, and I think what will come out of the AusCycling model is a national accreditation scheme around coaching. You'll be able to choose your specialties that you want to work in, such as track or road, but it'll be recognised by one organisation. So under the proposal, all the current recognitions as a coach or an instructor in BMX or in road or track or mountain bike will all be then formed and come under the AusCycling accreditation, and you'll be recognised that way. I think organisations like yours and many others are fundamentally critical in the whole network of our capacity to deliver outcomes and meet the demands. There's many people who have demands outside what our clubs can currently service, and we need to draw on those networks and include them into the model. So under the model, there'll be ways for businesses that provide service, not just clubs, to be incorporated as service providers and organisations to help aid that deliverable, but also to service members and the broader community of cyclists who may not be a part of the club or that traditional structure. Have we?
Thanks, Leanne.
I'll take another one online. If it's a bigger organisation, how will we ensure that the money just isn't sucked up into supporting the administration?
I think we tried to address that by illustrating where we saw the staff actually sitting. So in one of the slides that I showed, we were showing more people working in the local offices than currently are, and then some filling in some white space, if you like, to provide the services that we don't currently provide, and that being there to help clubs and riders. So it's not about, again, building some great big central bureaucracy, as Dunk said. It's about trying to structure ourselves to provide the best support for clubs and riders.
I've also run not-for-profits a fair bit in my life, and I think it's also important that any organisation's only assets is its people, really. You know, BHP, Lee works at BHP. If the top 200 executives in BHP all go in one accident, the share price goes to $1. It doesn't matter how many copper mines and gold mines they own. Any organisation's only assets is its people. And you know, we've got real gaps in what our people do across all these organisations. Sport Australia, Cam should block his ears. You know, originally said to us, how much, you know, what sort of cost savings can you pull out of the merger of the 19 organisations? And our response was, you know, if Lockie running Cycling South Australia has an election coming up and he wants a health policy or an infrastructure policy or a mental health policy, if there's a policy team in the centre that's written that for other elections and he can just pull that resource out of the centre, that's a huge asset. If there's a central club services team of half a dozen or 10 people sitting in the middle treating clubs just like franchisees, doing everything they can to help clubs function and be the best they possibly can, that's an outstanding thing for them to be doing. So I think, again, the glass half full approach to this is we need to be spending money on people. We've got to make sure it doesn't become an underperforming grade bureaucracy, but as a sport, there are things we should be doing and that we aren't doing. And the intention will be to recruit the best people we possibly can and to invest in them to support the sport. And I don't think we should shy away from that.
Back in the room? Yep. You'll get fit. More questions. We want to see how much of a sweat we can get going.
Sorry, this stuff's a bit of my bread and butter, so I've got a few queries.
Yep. Stacey again, welcome.
Nice to see you again, Scott. Obviously, Sport Australia's position is they want that unified management system, and a lot of the funding is potentially linked to that. And at a state level, there has been some hesitancy from some of the state governments around the funding. I think practically it still will work. I guess my question is, it might even be for the Sport Australia representative, if this doesn't happen, what's the funding around cycling going forward?
Yeah, thank you. Cam French from Sport Australia. I think the first probably point to make is around our role in really supporting and facilitating this process. I think to say that Sport Australia has been driving it and leading it, I think is factually incorrect. And if you think about the chairs and the CEOs who have done all the heavy lifting to come to this position and reach a position where our NSOs are in agreement around what their future state looks like, I think shows you that the NSOs have clearly driven the process. In terms of the funding and the model that's been put up, again, that's been co-designed by the disciplines themselves. So we have a range of governance reform activities that we do fund, and we fund alignment and we fund efficiencies. So the model that's been put to us is to come together in AusCycling, which we're supportive of. Now, if a different model was proposed to us, then we would have to consider it on its merits as well. But I think looking at AusCycling and working within the broader sports sector, I think at one of the discipline workshops said there's two sports can make a huge difference on the Australian society. And you think about the challenge we have with obesity, transport, the environment, getting kids active, mental health, etc. One is round ball world football and the other one is cycling. And that's why we're so committed to this, because we actually see the potential that's been articulated here tonight. That's why we're here and that's why we're supportive. But make no mistake, it is the people in front of you who have come up with the plan rather than Sport Australia. We've just been here from a supportive role and a facilitative role, and we want to see this organisation flourish, hence our investment.
Probably, I agree that it's supported. My issue is that it's not us as individuals in the room that vote on this, and it's a proportional voting, and I guess funding in the Sport Australia model is around bigger number base to greater benefit. So I guess if this doesn't get, my question was, if this doesn't get off, how do you see the funding of the sport going forward with the small?
Yeah. So the funding that's been proposed is predicated on the 3 cycling entities come together to realise the potential of the sport. So we think it's a potential discussion. We think huge potential in cycling. The way to deliver that potential is to have the disciplines come together to deliver that potential, and hence our investment. So, if they're not coming together, then obviously the funding, will not flow. Yeah, Lee's just asked me to touch on NSO recognition, which is around Sport Australia working through a process of the organisations that we recognise. And what we've done is we've given all 3 of the cycling disciplines provisional recognition to December 30, and then we'll review that pending the decision. But the board's been really strong with their intent to only fund one cycling entity or recognise one cycling entity.
Darren Mick, Central District Cycling Club. Just wanted to clarify, when you speak about advocacy, we're talking about advocacy to raise funds, etc., to further the racing side of cycling, or are you interested in getting involved what's already pretty well covered by state organisations such as Bicycle South Australia?
Thanks for the question. I think over time we want to be more active in all aspects, because we do want to represent all riders. And again, if I look across the spectrum, we talked about the 19 organisations, add on the vets, add on the state-based advocacy ones, add on the safety advocacy ones, you quickly get up to sort of 35 different organisations, all of which have a small voice and limited impact. And so really what we'd love in 5 years' time or 10 years' time or whatever is to have, ideally one. Because we think that they are acting in the interests of all bike riders. We do want, we want our kids to be riding, so we need to be advocating in that respect. We want them to be safe on the roads or wherever they're riding, so we need to be advocating for that. But equally we need, there's a lot of change that's happened in Australian society over the last 40 years. Population's grown by about 70%, but there's 3 times as many cars on the road. And that's resulted in a fundamental change in parental attitude to cycling. As I think it was Martin who said before, kids just don't ride as much as they used to. And we think that there needs to be a strong voice that's actually advocating for the activity of cycling, and then that will flow through into the competitive side as well, because there's another piece there as well. If parents don't feel that their children are safe riding on the road or on the footpath or whatever, then we need to be advocating for facilities where kids can ride, where parents are comfortable that they can ride, so that they then become cyclists. Otherwise we've got a big problem 10, 20, 30 years down the track. If kids aren't riding, we're not going to be having so many competitive cyclists.
Just further to that, I guess you'd approach those other organisations in the same way that you've approached this process, that they'd be welcome to participate and possibly...
Absolutely. And I think there was a question earlier about, I think it was the one from Facebook about, how we're going to do advocacy. I mean, one possibility is we go out and hire somebody. Another possibility is we get our act together here, get the 19 together, and 1 or 2 of those are fast followers and come and join us. Because again, we don't want to start doing what somebody else is already doing. We want to actually, bring the system together so that we've got a louder voice acting for cycling as a whole.
Yep. James, you've got one?
Another quick one, and again, open to anybody. It's quite clear that you've all put a lot of time and effort into this. One of the questions that I came up with looking at the slide yesterday regarding the British sponsorship by HSBC is, has this sort of merger occurred before? Firstly. Secondly, What consideration has been given to the lessons, if that's occurred before, and what do you see as being the major barriers to the success of it?
I just want to check, James, so when you say, has this happened before, so a merger of the three organisations?
Yes, or similar, such as in the UK, where clearly the UK, there's a single organisation, that's how they've achieved the single sponsorship. That was the example that's given in the slide pack.
Yeah.
Did it occur there? My understanding is that in Belgium there's a single organisation, although I'll be corrected if I'm wrong on that. I don't know whether there is elsewhere in the world. Were they created as merged entities, or did they generate as single entities in the first place?
I think in most cases that they've generated as single entities. We know that currently Australia is realistically the most fragmented of all in the world. In the US, BMX are separate, but mountain bike comes under US cycling. So there is not many examples where this is done before, because historically they've all originated out of a single entity from cycling as one. I think we also have some additional challenges, is that we are a much bigger country than many others, and that we have a federated model. We inherited that from our original beginnings, and so that has flowed through into the structure of a lot of our sports and organisations and departments and things like that. So, and then for various reasons, whilst we may have been together at various times within Australia, we've sort of broken away. We don't see that as a sustainable, long-term, or really a true beneficial way to go into the future. But to answer your question, British cycling, my understanding of the British cycling model was they used to have separate licences, but they weren't as fragmented as we are currently. They were able to consolidate, they brought everything into the same office, became a more functional sort of operating model rather than siloed, and therefore were able to speak with one voice, attract sponsors with one voice, speak to government, and have a change of influence. But it's not quite the same. So that's the examples that we have.
So aside from other cycling models, is anybody else on the panel aware of either other sports models where this sort of merger has occurred, or for that matter in other corporate situations where such fragmented organisations have been brought together? And subsequently, my final question, what was the barriers to success, and how are we addressing those?
I'm happy for others to have an answer here, but this is unique in Australian sport. You know, there's a process at the minute about trying to bring a number of sports together under a one management or improved operational model, but this is quite unique, and we are working to collectively bring three disciplines together, not just, you know, create a one management model. Shooting in Australia has probably some similarities in that they are quite there's a number of disciplines there, and they've been able to come together in some ways, but it hasn't been to an optimum output that I would suspect at this stage.
Sailing and golf have had a crack at it, and the core concepts here are: do you merge the entities and do you merge the management teams? And what do you do with the different entities across different states, and what do you do with the different entities across different disciplines? And you know, one of the reasons why we're proposing doing it all in one step is to try and set it up for success and not to sort of go to half pregnant steps. So I think when you look at the people who've gone before us, particularly in sailing and golf, they've gone halfway down the road. You know, there's a proposal floating around at the moment that you merge the SSOs, so you have one state body in each state, and merge the national bodies. And you've then got 9 management teams and 9 balance sheets, down from 19. I don't think that takes you far down the road. You know, I've tried to live in a federated model for the last 2 years. I've watched us have debates about, you know, which CRM system to buy rather than to replace Excel. I've watched the federated system debate how to carve up insurance premiums and how much do the state organisations pay and how much gets pushed onto members. If we try to introduce a national policy on whether to buy Arnott's biscuits or not, my view is there'd be a debate amongst the federated system. So if we're going to do this well and preserve what we're doing really well today, and all the organisations are doing things well, you keep people on the ground, you support the clubs better, you have state officers in every office, and you provide them with better services. So there's a central club services team, a central policy team, a central bike ed team. So the things that are happening at the coalface today don't change. You give disciplines voices by putting them on the board. You give states voices by creating state advisory councils who can influence the board. So you try and keep the things that are precious. But I can't think of we've looked globally for an example of a high performance sector with 19 balance sheets and 19 management teams, or 9 or 5. And you just see examples of failure, which is why we're suggesting do this once, do it courageously, understand the risks. The identity point you raised earlier is a really important risk, but try and set it up for success from the get-go, rather than in some half-pregnant place that leads to failure.
And just to finish off there, some of the barriers. We've gone through, I guess, with every suggestion and opportunity that we've come up with, we've also got some risks as well. So we've had a number of debates about those. We have, some plans in place. We're trying to mitigate those and minimise those. Some of the biggest barriers can also be our biggest opportunities. So, you talk about culture and identity. Well, they could also be the things that actually derail this whole thing, because people want to keep their own and they don't want to share. But it also could be extremely powerful if we come together, recognising that, but also, coming together when we can, but then also, coming from a place of either BMX or MTBA or road or track, or whether you're representing your state, you might be representing, a community as well, or, I might be representing the females in my area. So, people need to be a little bit flexible. So we've had, a number of conversations about those. Other barriers are, a fear of unknown. This is very different. We don't have a textbook. We don't have someone else that we can look at and say, they've done it this way and here is their transition plan and here is how they executed it. However, we've got, a steerco, we've got a transitional board, and we've got 3 CEOs here. We've all got probably 20 to 30 years experience of each of us in our professional jobs, in our sport and our passion as well. So, Sports Oz have helped with some consultants and some resources in the communications, branding, project management, so we're drawing on all of those resources as well. So where we don't actually know, we're trying to fill in those gaps and we're acknowledging those gaps and working on them. And one of the other ones would be a single vision. Many organisations have great ideas, but if you're not all actually heading in the same direction, you're just all scattered. So we've been, very, very particular about, these are the benefits for absolutely everybody. This is the vision. This is where we're heading. What we don't have at the moment is a single CEO who will take that on. But we thought it was quite important not to actually have someone from one of the existing entities to show you that this is new. That will go through a recruitment process. So, and then the nominations committee will take into consideration, all the applications, and we will have a single leader who will have to be passionate, who will have to take this forward. And then they'll have some support from the CEOs in the transition capacity, and Duncan, Darren and myself on a board, so that we can help, pass on that knowledge as well. So, we don't lose everything on day one. We have some continuity, but we have some fresh ideas. We have some, vision and support going forward. And I think it was Martin touched on it as well, is the next big thing is an implementation plan. So we've got some ideas on what needs to be done by when. We've got Sports Oz helping out in a in an IT and a technical solution perspective. We know we've got to bring all this stuff together. We've got a lot of transition planning to do, and we know that the success of this will be in the transition and the implementation of that. That's my area of expertise. We've also got a lot of expertise and depth and knowledge in the team as well. And that's actually the next hard road that we have to travel. And that's realistically 12 to 18 months of work. So we might be a little bit fatigued by the end of it.
If we're taking a vote on biscuits, ice vovo for me. I'll put one vote up, okay. And look, sailing got mentioned. Now, on the board of Sport Australia is Andrew Plimpton, who was heavily involved in changing the structure within sailing, and that immediately led to international success, Olympic Games, etc., off the back of him having that understanding, changing the structure. So there's someone that is overseeing this process and absolutely agreeing with it. From his own experience, which is a great thing. Now we've got some more online questions, or no, up the back there. Sorry.
Tom Freeman, similar scenario to James with being involved in road, BMX, and mountain bike, and I think this is a great idea. And I have thought why it wasn't like this 10 years ago when I needed to get all 3 licences. Further to the question about funding, about what happens if it doesn't get voted in, what happens to the actual operation if it gets voted a no? So if you're in one of the 3 states that might vote no from BMX, or if you're in mountain bike and mountain bike votes no, how is that all going to work going forward from there?
It's a great question, Tom. As I mentioned in the implementation process, these are special resolutions that need to be passed by the members, and we need 6 out of 8 states for CA and BMX, and we need 75% of mountain bike members who vote to vote for it. If we don't reach those levels, then I suppose we've got the status quo. So there may be situations where all 3 of the NSOs don't reach that level, and then we can keep the same fragmented 19 organisations, and we can try and see how we're going to take cycling forward. There may be situations where 2 of the 3 NSOs vote in favour of it, and 1 stays out, 1 votes no. In those situations, we foresee that those 2 NSOs that vote for it will join. They'll become AusCycling. They'll receive the NSO status from Sport Australia, and we'll begin putting this structure in place. The one who has voted against it, I suppose that's a decision of their members, and they need to then stay within their status quo, and they can keep on doing what they're doing. And we would hope that in time they would see the benefit of coming in, and those doors will always be open. But the fact is, if the members vote no on it, then we keep what we've got.
I guess more, because I'm more currently active in BMX, if you get 3 of the states that don't want to do it, will the others go in and those 3 remain out, or will the whole sport remain out of it?
We would have a situation from BMX Australia's point of view that we have not received the member approval to a level that is needed for us to wind up the organisation, transfer assets. Now, if AusCycling got up and running, you know, maybe some of those states might prefer to affiliate with AusCycling. That's something that we wouldn't have any control over, and that's a possibility. But with only 5 voting in favour of it, we don't have the legal capacity to wind up the organisation.
Just further to that, I think if AusCycle was to be formed by any two of the three, the reality is that AusCycle is a club-owned new entity, and it would become the choice of clubs, irrespective of whether their sport joined or not, that they could join into the AusCycling fold. And the same for members, because that's the structure of the new entity, is that it's club-owned, clubs affiliate and become the owners of the organisation, and members can join the organisation at any point, like they can under the current structure today. But it would create a very challenged environment, irrespective for all to operate. I think we also need to realise that it's a loss of opportunity, in that we certainly don't want, from our perspective, to see anyone left out. The intention is that we see all included, because that's what gives this organisation and this proposal and concept its strength, is that it's a united organisation. We understand that that will be challenging for some, potentially at the start-up. But it is very important that we don't really miss this opportunity collectively, I think. And so we obviously want to keep the doors open for people to come in, and that is already there if the new entity sets up through the clubs being able to affiliate. But we hope that that is not the outcome here, because we really think that would be a shame for those organisations. And as I said, the reality of sport is changing. It's going to become more competitive. And if one of the organisations, and I think of ours, if we were not a part of the AusCycling model, it does create us a significant amount of operational challenges, and how we maintain that relevance to our members, and whether those members will then stay loyal to us to support us through that decision long term as well. So there's a lot to be considered.
Yep, we've got another question down here. Well, we've got one up the back there. Yeah, you go for it.
Yeah, my name's Dino. I'm from BMX. The question I got, you said you're going to have 3 members from each discipline joining a subcommittee. What's the criteria for their selection, and when will they be selected for your subcommittee?
So you're referring to the state advisory boards?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So there is a charter being developed around the state advisory boards right now, which will contain a lot of that recruitment and the detail of how that happens. We can't really call for that until we've got a decision as to whether we're progressing with the AusCycling model. But I would expect that will be an EOI process, or a process, coordinated from within the various state sporting organisations right now to form those state advisory boards. But there is a charter being prepared, and as soon as that is available, it will be made available for viewing on the AusCycling site.
So that's a fairly recent addition, the advisory boards that came out of the discipline workshop. So it's only just being drafted, is because it's only 2 weeks old. So at the discipline workshops, we heard loud and clear that the states wanted some involvement. So we've quickly incorporated those advisory boards into the business model, and drafting up that charter. But it was something that's new for us, hence why it's still pretty draft.
Another question. You said you're going to have 90 staff members based around Australia with an outlet in each state. What budget have you allowed for to cover that cost?
I'll hand that one over to Steve, but we've used existing budgets for the financial model.
Yeah, so in terms of how we fund the increased staff, as Lee said, we're taking the existing P&Ls of all of the state and territory bodies plus the NSOs, adding those up. we then have made some assumptions about revenue growth from membership growth, because we do think that we'll be able to grow membership a little bit more strongly than we have in the past, because the actual model is more attractive and simpler to factor in. And then we've also assuming that we'll have some better commercial outcomes over time, and that's basically how we fund the higher staffing numbers.
What dollar figure have you put on that to run it for the first 12 months?
That's a good question off the top of my head. The staffing budget is around 7 million per year.
Just quickly, just on that staffing question, part of it. Sorry, I've got a few questions, but this one leads in to that. I would have thought there would have been some efficiencies with combining a number of organisations, and from my understanding, from what you're saying, there's actually additional staff members. How many of them are on a short-term basis to get the organisation going? And because I would have thought in the long term we should be seeing some efficiencies in staffing numbers.
Yeah. So again, in the detailed financial model, we do have some cost factored in, if you like, for consultants who are helping to bring the organisations together. There is over time, I guess we've had this question often about, are we trying to save money? And yes, we're trying to be more efficient, but we're then trying to reinvest it in different parts of the operations. So again, at the moment we're running 3 different websites, 3 different entry systems, etc. There's lots of 3s and there's lots of 19s, and when you get rid of the 3s and the 19s, it frees up some. It might only be small pockets of money across the system, but for example, at the moment we're spending a couple of $100,000 on audits because we have to have 19 audits. We really only need 1 audit, and that 1 audit will probably cost about twice as much. The largest audit at the moment is CA, and for the combined organisation, that audit will maybe cost twice as much, maybe not even that, and that frees up close to 75% of the amount that we spend on audits at the moment. And there's little bites all around the system that together add up to some really significant savings that can be reinvested into some of those white space areas that we talked about, club and member services, infrastructure and other advocacy functions, lots of things that can be used for the benefit of clubs and members.
Hi, Gemma from Port Adelaide Cycling Club. We're one of the clubs that's actually affiliated with CA and MTBA, and one of the reasons why we undertook that was the freedom to be able to deliver the type of events we wanted to be able to do, as well as the financial freedom. So CA treats its, well, not CA, but CA's state bodies treat some of its states treat their clubs differently. For example, in South Australia, you could call it a participation tax or a fee for service, or however you want to call it, on every event, whereas under Mountain Bike Australia we can deliver events where all of the funds are returned to the local community or reinvested in the club. So what guarantee do you have for clubs moving forward under this model that some of those freedoms that we currently enjoy won't be taken away, or we won't be charged extra? Because obviously under this model there's the ability to have more freedom in running the type of events we want to run, whether it's road track, cyclocross, grass track with Kathy over there, bike jousting in the pub, roller racing in the brewery. There's so many events that we could be running, but under the current box of what type of event is this, what length socks do you need to have, do we have to pay a participation fee? Some of those questions really affect people out in clubland. So there are differences in how state bodies and national bodies are treating their clubs. So it's a complicated question, but will we have more or less freedom to do services for our members?
Okay, Okay.
Sorry.
Shane, before you start, Gemma, is there a particular sock height for the jousters?
Well, we haven't quite nailed the jousting, whether it's a PVC
Is that a
pipe
pun,
or
nailing the jousting?
We are writing the rules for that in the back there. And we got a first here, I think.
Given we seem to have perhaps the loosest type arrangements, and we do know about the jousting, and we have looked into the jousting, I think this comes back to the question you asked earlier: how can we benefit each other through, the cultures and the practices and the operations that we do? And this is somewhere where we do need to take reflection and look at what works, but we also need to be mindful that there are many, many people and doing many, many different things, such as what you've just described, and we need to embrace those, and we need to make this sport continue to grow but be accessible. So we need to try and diminish those barriers where possible, and that will be the intention to do that. We're not out there to tax people for competing in a sport. That's not what we want to do. We want to facilitate and encourage and make it accessible and easy for them to participate in a sport, whatever that format is. So we will be looking very hard at the operating models of the new organisation so that we can mitigate against the discrepancies that you've talked about, streamline processes so that what is common in Tasmania is the same as in Northern Territory, is the same in WA or wherever you may be, because that is the intention and the outcomes that we can achieve by streamlining and synergising our organisation. That means that we can take some of those learnings. I don't even know why you would have a sock length, but please forgive me for not.
Iron sleeves.
Sometimes we're happy if there are socks. So I think the reality is that there is so much learning and so much good things that we can bring to each other, but at the minute we're not doing it. And hopefully, collectively, we can improve and make those benefits that you're talking about into the new AusCycling model.
Thanks.
And the marginal gains comment with the correct accent as well, as it originated from the UK. And BMX with jousting sticks, there's another one we can throw in. I'd love to see that. Yes, down the front.
Jake, current staff member at Cycling SA. I guess to read the room and the state a little bit leading up to this, we South Australians don't seem to have huge fatal concerns about the proposal. In a situation where there is a majority support across some or all of the organisations but not the required 75%, will there be a consideration for a revised proposal that perhaps mitigates some of the concerns of the vocal no voters if they're in a minority, to kind of bring them into the fold and make them heard to eventually get to a yes vote?
I think we're hopeful that we can mitigate the concerns of the minority before we get to the vote, so that we actually do get the majority. And these kinds of forums are ways to understand those concerns and try to explain why we think that the benefits of what we're proposing outweigh the risks of not going or not progressing forward. And Martin had the slide around what we do miss out on if we don't go down that route. Look, I hope we don't have to go through a no vote and then recut. Again, one of the joys of having the 19 different entities is every year we have elections of directors and things change, and getting to that consensus view is hard. So yes, there's a possibility that we go through a no and then we have to sort of try again, but we may actually be starting to diverge rather than converge after that no vote, and I think that would be really, really bad for cycling more broadly in Australia, because again, we are in a really competitive market, and I think that to just think about cycling and just think about the status quo is the wrong thing, because we are competing for the hearts and minds of kids and parents, etc., against the AFL, against NRL, against soccer. These are really, really well-funded professional codes, and, the Olympic sports do it tough. And unless we get our act together and be as efficient as we possibly can, we're not going to be able to compete with those guys. So that's, ultimately we need to come together to maximise the outcome for the activity of cycling.
Another one about to come up, yep.
So, Andrew, president of Adelaide University Cycling Club. So as a relatively small club in a pretty small state, when you compare it against New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, how do we ensure that our voice isn't sort of drowned out? Like, obviously there's the voting model when there's an AGM or an EGM or an SGM or whatever, that the votes go, but as far as infrastructure spending goes, if we're getting more infrastructure into the sport, that's good, but it often gets clustered around the population centres like, Sydney or Melbourne, and a lot of that would go there, whereas there's a lot of good clubs around the state, like in the Wyler Cycling Club, the Mount Gambier Cycling Club, places like that, that have not many members and small sort of advocacy groups within them. So how do we ensure that it goes out to everyone, not necessarily based on just who can talk the loudest within the state or members?
Look, I think one of the things about the model that we've tried to put together is that at the centre of it is it's going to be, our decision making is based around what's good for the rider, right? And that's riders in all states and all disciplines. It doesn't matter what they're doing, why they're riding. We want to make decisions that are good for all riders. And we understand that there's going to be times, when decisions will get made to allocate resources to certain areas. And they're going to be allocated across the country. There may be times when South Australia has a really great opportunity and a great project, and resources will be allocated to that. And there may be times when that's in Tasmania or New South Wales or Queensland. So they're decisions that will get made by the board, and the board will have a very strong national advisory group there to help oversee those things and remind them if they're straying a little bit too far in certain areas. But the board is very clear that they are here for all riders in all states. One of the other things to remember is that under this model, you have a state office that has a direct line into the CEO and the organisation, and rather than having to make your representations through differing bodies, as happens at the moment, as we've said, our local officers are the coalface, and they're going to be treated with great respect, and their views are going to be treated with great respect. And that opportunity to have your state office being not a separate body from the national organisation, but being a part of the national organisation, makes it really easy for those views and those opportunities to be represented to the people that make decisions. So I think that's a really important factor to remember.
I think another issue is I see this as a democratisation of the sport. I'm a club person who's happened to end up on the board of CA. And if you're running a club and you're working hard and you're dependent on volunteers and you're trying to do the best things by your members and you try and influence the board of CA or the board of BMXA, it's hard. You go to your state and the sport is very wide and very deep, and it can be hard to hear for your voice to be heard. And this is about collapsing the sport, creating a new structure and handing ownership and empowerment back to the clubs. And as we all know, if you live with social media all day, vocal minorities tend to get heard. And the reality is, if half a dozen small regional clubs in South Australia form a WhatsApp group and turn up at an AusCycling AGM or write to the board and say we want to come along and be heard. Now, the ability of small voices to gain traction, I think, is greater under this model than it currently is. If a couple of small clubs at the moment try and get hold of a NSO board and influence them, I've done that from that part of the system, and it's hard. Under this model, you own the place. And if a relatively modest number of you get together, you can have a heck of a lot of influence, in my view.
The other thing to note as well is that if you are a small club and you've got a great idea, you go to your state office. The state office can also contact the national office, and not just head office, but all of them, and say, we need some support, we need a person, we need, some material, and they'll have access to that. It's like, well, that's a great idea, Whyalla, because we've also done that in the Northern Territory, in Alice Springs. So, what would you like? Would you like someone to come along to the discussion? Do you want some material? Here's something that we've prepared earlier. So you'll get that, the ability to reach into the broader organisation. And you don't need to navigate that yourself. You would do that through your state office, and then the state office would somehow send out some sort of broadcast, or they would be aware of national grants or local grants, or other, or people who have been able to articulate that really well, who would also be able to come along and support those decisions. So, you're local, but you have that depth behind you to access those resources.
Without being a microphone hog, just because it leads in from that question, I mean, I've had a look at the papers in regards to the proportional voting, and I think that's a really great initiative. I just wanted to know if there had been some, as I said, coming from a sport that's done this, and there is some proportional voting, has been the ability in my other sport for a couple of states, even based on that modelling, to potentially see a benefit to themselves that might be great for New South Wales and Queensland, but it's probably not great for the benefit of the sport. Have you done any modelling around the proportions on a state-by-state basis? And if you haven't, is there a possibility to introduce like potentially a double majority where it gets over that line, but it also has to be a majority of the states?
Yeah, we looked at a very broad range of different combinations of voting. I think that the way that we sought to address that more specifically is just through the Constitution and enshrining that kind of ethos of all riders, all clubs, all states, all bikes in the Constitution. And so the kind of, again, I think the important thing is to distinguish between voting on board members and things like that, between that and modifying the Constitution, because if you're going to try to make some sort of fundamental change like that, you would need a special resolution, which is 3/4, and the ratios that we displayed up there don't get you to that. You can't get two big states come and gang up on the little ones.
I think that's question number 6 from you, Leanne. Stacey, sorry. Port Adelaide. It's a big club, Port Adelaide, so yeah, fair enough.
I'll see if I can beat 6 questions, mate.
Yeah, okay, Dino.
Now, you said we have to give up our assets if we join AusCycling. What happens if we want to join, AusCycling, but we don't want to give up the assets that we've built over our so many years?
You're talking about at state level?
Yeah. At state level, yep.
Look, one of the, I suppose, the fundamental principles of this is that if we're going to do it, we're all in. And we're all in every way. You know, where you can't take the benefits of it without contributing to the working capital and the financial base that the organisation needs in order to deliver the services that we want to deliver. And I can understand that that's a pretty scary prospect for a lot of clubs, for a lot of states and national bodies. Believe me, I've struggled with this. We're BMX Australia. We've got $1 million to put into this, and I've spent a lot of time going, you know, that's a lot of money. Is this the right thing to do? I've eventually come to the position that we've got $1 million. If we want to deliver all the things that AusCycling can deliver, we couldn't possibly do that on $1 million. We might be able to do it for a year, 2 years, but eventually we'd just run through that money. So then it becomes a question of what do we do? Do we say to ourselves, well, we'll actually sit on the $1 million and we'll just keep it, that'll be our nest egg. We won't really use it for anything, but you know, we'll have it there. That doesn't really achieve anything either. So my point of view is that, yeah, we've got a fair whack of money to put into it, and that's just an investment. That's the investment in realising the opportunity of what AusCycling can deliver. Because we can't do it. We could stay BMX Australia for 100 years and we would probably never be able to deliver that. So if we want to be part of that, and if we want to be part of this absolutely kick-ass organisation that represents cyclists and becomes this body that is a really central part of the Australian sport and recreation landscape, that is the one organisation that represents cyclists of any type, any kind, anywhere in Australia, we've got to be willing to put our money into it. We've got to be willing to back it up. That's a tough decision, but I think when you have a look at what can be achieved with this organisation, it also becomes an easy decision. And the state organisations, hopefully, I would think would look at it and go, we've got an amount of money, and it varies across all the states and all the disciplines. What can we do with that? Can we achieve what AusCycling is going to achieve if we invest those funds ourselves? And if the answer is no, then why wouldn't you invest it in this prospect and try to make something really fundamentally fantastic for everybody that rides a bike in Australia?
Does that help, Dino?
Yeah, after all that, basically you mean we give up our assets to join.
Yeah.
So I guess it's understanding the concept and therefore acknowledging the opportunity that comes with it, and opportunity is everything.
Hi, excuse me. Malcolm Lawrence from the Cove BMX Club. So my understanding is the proposal is that at Clubland, not a lot's going to change. We're going to carry on and chase our own local government grants and do our own thing as we are, and perhaps we're a little more resourced behind from this new entity. Perhaps not in our sport, I don't know. I think we're pretty well resourced as it is. Whether that's going to be a lot better, we'll have to wait and see. But so there's clubs probably going to carry on and be what it is, and that's wonderful. The next step up, I guess, is as the families are progressing and the ones that are managing to stay within the sport and not disappear along the way. So there's a very small mention of pathways. But what happens to without the state bodies, and at the moment we have state bodies that support state teams and state training and state coaches. Where does that come from without that organisational structure? And then even further on up the pathway to the national level, and three letters I thought I would have heard already tonight with UCI, and our relationship as a cycling organisation with the International Federation, if we were with or without, this going forwards with this new structure is, so there's a couple of things, but, is our relationship with UCI for the guys that are at high performance level affected our future with or without this concept, as well as, that middle ground as well for the kids that are now starting to be, spotted off and, picked as being on a pathway to perhaps something bigger, and perhaps the ultimate level of any of the sports.
Yeah, there's a few sections to that, so remind me if I miss a few. In terms of the things that are happening today, with the events that are run at state level, the programs that are conducted at state level, state teams and those sorts of things, they will continue on. Right, they're things that are working for the sport, and we don't want this to affect that at all. So those things will continue on. I'm hopeful that with the assistance of a state office and some state employees, that'll make that job a little bit easier on the volunteers that give their time to make those things happen. But absolutely, we see that those things that are just so fundamental to the sport, whether it's BMX or road or mountain bike, will continue into the future. There's no reason that we would want to change those. In terms of pathways, that is something that we see as something that we can make some real improvements in. Shane referred to it in his presentation that we see one of the benefits out of this is that we're going to be able to have some structured pathway programs. At the moment, they're very, very fractured. There's the high performance program that's run by CA, and then at BMX we have our academy or national team program. Shane at mountain bike has some stuff going on as well with their programs, but they're very fractured. So we want to see that those programs get better funded and have better support to them. We want to make sure that as part of one organisation, it's easier for us to provide integrated programs. So, at the moment, it's very difficult because we've got, in BMX, we've got the 8 state organisations. Everybody probably does things a little bit differently, supports different types of riders, does things their own way. We want to be able to see as part of one national organisation that there's a really great structured program that can help develop riders and develop them with a little bit more support than they've had at the moment, and develop them into the stages of getting into high performance programs and receiving that great support.
So the resources will also be shared then in your vision, like fitness type programs, watt bikes, that sort of, there's at the moment, again, that's also very fractured, and there might be one in the state for one, or one cycling group, and
exactly.
There might be a university full of them that we're not accessing, in the city here.
Yeah, I mean, that comes back to that stuff we've spoken about sharing across disciplines and sharing that information and resources and knowledge. So they're the things that we see as being really important outcomes from this.
Finally, just with my last question, with the licensing model that's been put up with the costings, none of those include an international. Is that still going to be an extra fee to ride in an international event?
I would have to hand over to Steve, who knows UCI.
It probably would be an extra fee to get an international licence, but we haven't worked out. Probably, I think it's reasonable to assume it'd be about the same as it is today, but adding on to a lower base, because the base will be.
I think there's also a little known, probably not a well-known fact that certainly under the MTBA insurance policy, which would be very similar to the others, that provided you're not competing, your insurance actually does cover you internationally. So, to answer your question directly around the UCI, I'd defer to Steve. That's around the competition side of the UCI requirements. But certainly, the cost of that, I don't know. That's something that would be reviewed. But certainly, under some of the general riding, you might find that the normal membership would cover you whilst you're participating overseas.
I just think of like a trip to Worlds from a BMX point of view becomes a Cycling Australia membership on top of a UCI licence, whereas that I'm assuming would just be a UCI licence if we're already under one structure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in the presentation, you'll see that Pathways has equal fitting billing with high performance. So it certainly has been well thought through. And Pathways isn't just about the athletes as well. There's volunteers that, if you're a BMX father and you're there as a volunteer, you may just want to stick with BMX, but there are plenty of volunteers that just want to help. And if they're now part of one group that can go to mountain bike, to track, road and to BMX and just want to help, that's obviously a benefit for the entire organisation.
My name's Tessa. I'm from Port Adelaide Cycling Club and I ride a couple of different disciplines. My question was to do with 2020 licensing. So if we're looking at implementation mid-2020, what kind of licenses would we purchase at the start of next year?
It's a good question, and it's certainly one that we've had to consider. But the reality is, until we get to a start date of AusCycle, the existing entities continue to operate as they are. Anyone who holds an existing organisation or from their predecessor organisation or licence with them at that time will just be recognised within the new entity, and as that membership expires, then you will just buy within the new organisation.
And we do have about 10 more minutes of Q&A, so we can go online if you've got any questions that have come through online. But just think about it in the room. We've got about 10 more minutes to go.
There's a few online, and I'll just note that we'll look to address those that have been sent online if we can't get to them tonight, and we'll try and add them to the website. So if you've asked a question online, don't feel like you've been left out. We'll try and get to it over the next few roadshows or online. One around fees again. Will clubs have to pay licence fees to AusCycling? And I'll add to that there's another one about event levies to AusCycling.
I think the answer is yes. I don't think we should shy away from the fact that if we're going to offer services to members, at some point we have to pay for them. And so there are a range of different ways of doing that. Club levies are one, event levies are another. But we're also conscious of the fact that we want to facilitate as many people to ride and race as we possibly can. So our objective will be to provide the services that clubs and members want and are asking us for now at the lowest possible costs, and find the most efficient way of doing that.
But at the same time, we also have to support the service providers in the industry. We have to support the service providers in the industry as well, whether they, the private promoters, the people that we rely on to deliver these services. And, it's a full ecosystem. So, they're not included in these conversations, but we're cognizant of the need for, you know, the volunteers, the service providers, the local community areas, you know, and everything else that goes to putting on events, whether that's mass participation or races.
Thanks, Leah. I might go back to the earlier question. Sorry, Matt, I've forgotten your name. Malcolm. I think another elephant in the room that needs to be acknowledged is that CA has historically held the high performance and pathways power. It's got the funding, it's recognised by the UCI and the IOC and the AOC, and you know, I was in a board meeting most of the day talking about pathways and high performance, and there was no conversation, very little conversation about BMX and mountain bike. And they were roadies and trackies around the table, and Steve and I are proposing to be, you know, the last ever CEO and Chairman of Cycling Australia. We're putting our hands up to say that, you know, CA and the federated system in which it exists can't be fixed. It needs to be shut down and brought back to life in a new entity. And if you roll your mind forward a year, you know, there's 3 BMXers and 3 mountain bikers sitting at a table with the Australian cycling team reporting to them. And, you know, that's a seismic change. And in the org chart, as Scott pointed out, there's one box called Pathways that's the same size that sits right beside another box called High Performance. And that's a significant development. That's a very brave new world.
How are we going? Oh, yep, back.
Just a quick one on with Dino's question, actually. Are the clubs actually winding up? I thought it was only the state and the national-based entities that wound up. So any club that owns a shed and has built a BMX track, they don't lose that asset, do they?
That's correct. There's no impact on a club in that way. You'll be asked, clubs will be asked to vote whether they support this endeavour with their state organisations, but there's no impact other than being asked. And if it's a yes vote, then you will become an owner of the AusCycling model, but you'll still continue to own all your assets and operate as you do today. And if you vote no, it'll be the same too. So there is no change at all.
Anyone else in the room? Yep, down the back. Matthew, isn't it down the back? G'day, mate.
Just further to the fee structure that was sort of left dangling on the slide, does it mean that if I'm an AusCycling member, I have truly got a golden ticket if I join my road track cycling club, that I could then turn up to a BMX or mountain bike event, providing I nominate in time, and race for a road cycling club at that event? Or do I have to go join a road cycling club and a mountain bike club and a BMX club if I want to race across the 3 disciplines?
You're correct that you've bought one licence, $250, and you can race in any of the disciplines that you like. It's your choice which clubs that you join. In mountain, and I think this is where some of the traditions of the different disciplines come in. At mountain bike, you race not as a club, you race as an individual, and quite similar, I'd say, in BMX. So you race for your road club, you join your road club, you hold the golden ticket, as you call it. You can turn up at a mountain bike event and race in that. You turn up and race in a CX event. You turn up the following week and go and race in a BMX event. You can do all that. You don't, I guess, whether the clubs have a requirement for you to be a member of their event to race, I don't know. But in the mountain bike world, that's not the case.
So the garage space is going to get pretty tough, mate. A few more bikes to get. My advice, any road cyclist or track cyclist, just go and watch some BMX first before you launch yourself down a ramp. I'm sure that's the one crossover that might not happen that often.
I've got to say, being here tonight has sparked a memory that I'd truly forgotten when the Mount Gambier Track Cycling Club was challenged by the Mount Gambier BMX Club and vice versa. So, yeah, 2 very fun days.
Yeah. How many ambulances from the BMX day?
2.
Over the back.
Trevor Wigg from BMX. That's just made me think of, I guess, a good question around the clubs, and that at the moment part of the club survival is around membership, and so obviously there's this one membership, or the golden ticket, I think the man called it. So is that going to... I can just see that there's a possibility that's going to take away some of the club's revenue if someone doesn't have to join a club. So what's going to happen around that? Is there something that says, you have to join a club where, those BMX people will still be, participating in the revenue that they do now?
Okay. Yeah, look, it's a good question, and one that we've talked about and considered. We've, to go back to your question earlier, we've said that, you can join multiple clubs, so it really becomes your choice. I think a lot of ways club is about a community, and it's about supporting a community and contributing to that community, not just in time, but financially. I don't know across all groups how much different clubs charge, and in most cases it's probably a relatively nominal fee. A number of mountain bike clubs don't rely on membership fees to make money. It's more a contribution just into the club. But other clubs may be geared very differently. I think it also says to some clubs, to encourage your members, offer discounts in an event. There's all sorts of strategies that you can apply. Make it cheaper for a non-member to race, or keep the fee the same. And support and recognise the loyalty of your club members and return that back in favour. But I think what we're trying to say is that we're trying to make the sport accessible across the whole lot. We certainly don't want to see that negative impact on clubs. We hope that you might get more participants come and try and race in your events, because they don't have the burden of buying day licences and all these other things to access the opportunity to come and try your sport, or to try a different discipline, or to race. And we hope that by removing that big impediment of 3 licences that exist today, that will actually help clubs access more potential racers and members.
Thanks, that's good. Dino's got 4 questions left for you.
Can we consolidate them into one? Is there anyone else in the room? And just a reminder for those at home online that we will endeavour to get to your questions over the coming days.
Hi, Tim Ireland from Kilkenny Cycling Club. Is it envisaged that there would be individual memberships with, say, AusCycling Direct, not through a club? If so, I think it's a bad idea.
Yeah, another good question. What we have said is that, the practice that exists today, to race and to hold a race licence, you have to join at least one club. But we're also about encouraging and growing participation. And, I think an MTBA, our membership is 30-odd% now as a recreational member. Some of those are members of clubs, some of those are not members of clubs. To hold an MTBA membership as a recreational rider without a club, you pay more money than you would if you are a club member. And when you combine the club fee, it's actually still cheaper to join the club than to buy direct. Strategies like that might be applied, but I think if we want to grow our sport and make ourselves all-encompassing and accessible to all, we have to recognise that not everyone will join a club, unfortunately, and not everyone wants to race. So we need to broaden our vision there to do that, but to hold a vote, to race, you will need to be a member of a club.
Got another question over this side as well, unless you've got one over there. So we might just do a couple more questions.
Sorry, Sean from South Coast Cycling. So further to that, is the proposal in the future if you can have individual members for members to have an equal representation at AGMs or for AusCycle? Because obviously at the moment if you're proposing to have people have individual memberships rather than through a club, I can see clubs diminishing in their membership, which means committees are not going to be as strong at a club level, potentially. Would the proposal be to follow similar to the MTBA model of each member having a vote at the national level, or would it be a...
No, we would leave the power and the ownership with the clubs as they are today, or as we've proposed. You can be an individual member. You can choose just to be a member and not race, similar to what you do in an advocacy type body today. But you won't have a vote on the organisation. You'll simply be a member of that organisation. We're very focused on building on and respecting the history of our sports collectively through the club networks and structure, and that they will be the groups that will maintain the voting power.
One more? Yep.
I guess the other thing that I would add there is what we want to do is try to help the clubs build capability. So there are certainly a number of clubs that come from a racing background and just want to focus on racing, and that's fine. But over time, we think there will be dedicated rec clubs that grow and appeal to another slice of members, and there'll be some that are a hybrid. We already see those kinds of clubs now. So
I guess what I was getting at is at the moment there is at least in track cycling, which is what I'm quite familiar with, there's an obligation to be a member of a club. That brings more possibility of volunteers direct to that club, people who volunteer for races, committees, etc.
Yeah.
But if you take away that requirement, 100% guarantee you that a large number of people are going to say, why do I need to pay a club fee when I don't need to? And does that take both financial and personal resources away from those clubs?
yeah, no, we don't think so. I mean, I think it depends on which side you look at it from. Like, if the club is providing a service that members think is attractive, they will join the club. So
I wouldn't agree with that, sorry. I mean, Port Adelaide Cycling Club do a fantastic job of cyclocross. As everybody that rides cyclocross a member of Port Adelaide? Far from it.
no, but they will have to be a member. If somebody wants to race, they'll...
Simply by holding an event, you're guaranteeing membership. I don't believe that that's true. South Coast has done a great job of running club level track cycling. Is everyone who comes to our racing a South Coast member? Far from it. They'll support the event and that will continue, but I guess do the clubs potentially suffer from a lack of, from a potential drop in members?
I don't think so, because what we're saying is if you want to race, you do need to be a member of a club somewhere. So I think that's the first point. And then the second point, I think, is around the offering that the club does have. And, I think that, again, there are a lot of people who are potential volunteers who don't want to race, but they might, they love being part of the club. And again, if we have a healthy club environment, I think that will, those types of members will grow too.
Cool. I think I've got the last microphone option.
Well, there you are, yep.
Susan of SOCLing.
I just followed the accent, I knew where it was.
Yeah. Double foot, one in each camp from CA MTBA at the moment. So I'm just wondering, having commissared at both organisations, they're very, very different in terms of approach to tech regs, forms, expectations. So I'm just wondering, we've spoken a little bit about the cultures. So do you foresee that there'll actually be a streamlining of things like the tech regs and the forms and the risk assessments that go into event management?
I think it's one of those big challenges when we sit down and start doing the implementation and the transition of how that works. And we need to look at why things exist today between the two and how we then bring those together to make sure that we, one, primarily keep our sports safe for the participants, and we provide the best levels of service, and we don't make the process horribly erroneous on volunteers or people who are doing it. So I think we will look for some streamlining where it can, but there will also be specific reasons that things are done the way they are done today, and that needs to be preserved and protected because it's there for a reason. It's probably won't have just appeared. It will have come out of history and of evolution of a sport and development. So they will be protected, but where we can try and make the process a bit more streamlined, we will. But it may not be a one fit for all.
I think I agree. It won't be one fit for all, but it'll be good to only carry one set of tech regs around for each event, probably.
Make one big book altogether.
It's already a big book. And then if you add the UCI, yeah, I'll stop.
UCI road and track cycling sock height regulations won't be
midway
implemented.
between the Malleolus.
They won't be
and
implemented
the,
into BMX or mountain bike unless that comes into their sport as well from the other direction. Any more? Is there any other questions? No, we're all good. Thank you. And look, thanks to everybody that's online as well. As a reminder again to anyone that is listening still at home, that we will endeavour to get to your questions and answer those over the next couple of days. Now, I would just like to get some closing remarks from our chairs. So we'll start with Duncan, just to have his say from Cycling Australia's perspective.
I'll just use this one. I only want to make 2 points. One, I should have said this at the beginning. I've said it at most of the workshops we've had. This is a remarkable room, really. This is an old sport. There are clubs in this room that are more than 100 years old. I think the oldest I've heard of is 138, although Gemma will probably correct me shortly. And I don't think this has ever happened before. You know, we haven't had this conversation as a sport. We haven't had all these organisations sitting in a room having a civilised, constructive conversation. I picked up the phone to call Darren's predecessor in February last year, and he didn't know who I was. I had to explain I was the incoming chairman of Cycling Australia, and I'd like to get together and have a cup of coffee about how we can all work together. And he thought I was trying to hit the moon with the 22. Mate, there's just so much scar tissue and baggage. But there's a lot of merit to what you're saying. And the fact that we are all actually in this room having this conversation and we can all see that it has merit and that we are heading in the right strategic direction. I think so. You know, we're the first. Most of the people in this room are administrators. You know, we're running clubs, we're running states, we're running national organisations. We're the first group of people in 138 or whatever it is years to come together and have this conversation. So I think it's just worth reflecting that this is quite a special room and a historic room, as will all the other rooms over the next couple of weeks be. Secondly, you know, the elephant in the room is, you know, if the majority of us want it and a vocal minority don't, what does that mean? A couple of you asked that question. And my answer to that is, you know, I think this is a very catalytic conversation. There's a lot of people, a lot of governments, state, Commonwealth government, investing in this sport. There are a lot of members. We're all bound together by passion. We're all in this room because we love bikes. And if the majority of us who love bikes and love the sport say we want to do it, and the funders of the sport hear that, I can't see how the status quo prevails. You know, it has to change, and has to change for the better. So I think let's just go the course, go through this process, all do what we think is right, be honest with ourselves, and see where we end up. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, yeah, I thank everyone for coming this evening, and likewise, when Neil come back to BMX Australia board and said, CA, I'm going to have a coffee with the chair of CA. There was a little bit of laughter, and I was like, oh, CA. But the whole process from me coming on in sort of November last year has been one where BMX has surprisingly, accepted by all the other sports in the room, which was a little bit sort of unnerving at the start, because suddenly we realised that 2, 3-year-old kids are out there learning on BMXs. Not they don't generally ride mountain bikes from 2 years old or track bikes. So it's been sort of worthwhile and actually good, sort of listening to these guys saying, well, we need to be like one whole group of people. I think, if we can sort of bind together, and there is a leap of faith we all need to take, but it's one where it's for the good, and it's not. We're not going to sort of dwell on the doing it for the wrong reasons. We need to do it for the right reasons, and I think together we can. So from my point of view, I thank you all for being here tonight, and off to the more roadshows to come.
Thanks, Darren. Lee, by the seating position, you have the honour of wrapping things up.
Excellent. Just supporting sort of what's already been said. A lot of work has been done. A lot more work still needs to be done. The conversations are just starting. So, this is an opportunity, but we would highly encourage you, if you go away and you think about it, you sleep on it, please come back to us in whatever shape or form. There's FAQs, there's the website, there's email addresses, there's phone numbers. We are contactable and we're willing to listen. We may not have got this right. We keep sort of saying we're going to get things to about 80%, and then we're going to, put it out and ask for some feedback. We're going to continue to learn. We will continue to change, but we think we've done the best we can. There's some great opportunities, there's some concern and there's some fear. We have that as well, but we hope that we can get over that. That we can be looking sort of for the future. We're trying to set this up for 15, 20, 30 years. As Duncan said, I work at BHP. I do 100-year plans. It's a bit scary. This is not a 100-year plan, but let's sort of see if we can get this to, maybe sort of 15 to 20 years ahead of us. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. How old did you say Port Adelaide Cycling Club was? Is? Norwood's older. How old's Norwood?
1883.
Well, we're talking about 100-year plans. You actually fit into it. 136-year plan. Look, there is certainly a lot of passion in the room tonight, and a lot of passion that started this conversation with the CEOs and the chairs of the 3 different sports and disciplines. It is a marvellous opportunity, one that I'm certainly embracing and looking forward to. And this is, as Lee said, this is the start of the process. Listening to the members, listening to the individuals is really this next step now. Here, the presentation is out there. We're going to go around Australia presenting it to all the different states. Educating everybody as much as we can, so you can get a good understanding of what the process is and how it looks, and therefore how the opportunities will come from it. So thanks for kicking us off, South Australia. Adelaide, it's great to be here tonight, and I hope it's been very educational and inspirational for all of us. So thanks for coming along.